For over a century, it was sold as the purest thing you could put on a baby's skin. Soft, white, silky powder, dusted onto newborns by generations of parents who trusted a product marketed for generations around purity, gentleness, and infant care. Here's what most of those parents never knew. Talc, the mineral that powder is made from, forms underground in a way that geologists have documented since 1872, often sharing the same deposits as asbestos, one of the most dangerous substances a person can breathe. Not every talc deposit is contaminated, but some are, and for decades, the company that built its reputation on that little bottle knew far more about which ones than the public did. Talc itself is genuinely useful. It's soft, it absorbs moisture, and mined from a clean deposit, there's nothing dangerous about it. The problem was never the mineral in the abstract. The problem was what sometimes came up out of the ground along with it, and how long that was known before anyone outside the company found out. By the early 20th century, talcum powder had become a fixture of nurseries and bathrooms around the world, marketed specifically around infants and cleanliness. It wasn't a medical product making bold health claims. It was something simpler and, in a way, more powerful. A symbol, purity you could shake out of a bottle. Miners saw a different side of the mineral entirely. Occupational health researchers studying talc miners and millers in New York found significantly elevated rates of lung cancer and respiratory disease among workers with the longest exposure. A 1980 government study that identified several types of asbestos-related fiber in the very talc samples those men were mining. That's industrial exposure, at concentrations no consumer would ever encounter shaking a bottle over a diaper. It's a different question from what was happening in millions of ordinary bathrooms, but it proves the underlying danger was real, documented, and known to researchers decades before most consumers ever heard the word asbestos connected to baby powder. Then come the documents that changed the story. In 1973, an internal company report acknowledged trace levels of 2 types of asbestos in baby powder, sourced from the company's own mine in Vermont. A year later, an internal memo from that mine's research director went further, recommending a specific chemical treatment to suppress asbestos fibers in the raw talc, describing the material in his own words as presenting a severe health hazard. Separately, records show a company scientist pushing a supplier mine in Italy to stop distributing marketing materials that referenced trace asbestos at all, warning it could raise doubts about the product's reputation for purity. None of this reached the label on the bottle. And there's a stranger, harder to look at chapter buried in the same history. In 1971, the company funded a study that exposed prisoners in a Pennsylvania facility to asbestos on their skin, comparing their reactions to talc. Decades later, the company apologized for it, while noting that testing on prison inmates was, at the time, a widely accepted research practice. It's a genuinely uncomfortable fact and an entirely real one. The safety of this product was, at least once, investigated through experiments on incarcerated people, a research practice that would face fundamentally different ethical standards today. For decades, none of this was public. The internal documents stayed internal. The bottle stayed the same. Lawsuits over the product had already been building for years by the time investigative reporting in 2018 brought thousands of pages of those internal company records to much wider public attention, and the litigation that followed grew into the tens of thousands. Here's where the story gets genuinely complicated, and worth being careful about. 2 different medical claims run through this litigation, and they are not the same question. Mesothelioma, a rare and aggressive cancer, has an extremely well-established link to asbestos exposure generally. That connection isn't in serious scientific dispute. Ovarian cancer and cosmetic talc use is a separate, more contested question. In 2025, the International Agency for Research on Cancer classified talc itself as probably carcinogenic to humans, based on limited evidence in people, sufficient evidence in animals, and strong mechanistic evidence. The agency also noted that many older human studies, couldn't reliably rule out asbestos contamination in the talc being studied, which complicates any clean separation between the risk of pure talc and the risk of contaminated talc in the historical record. Separately, the sister study, a National Institutes of Health cohort following more than 50,000 women, found a measurable association between heavy, long-term talc use and ovarian cancer in 2024. An association, not proof that talc caused any individual case. The science here is real, active, and still not fully settled in either direction. Juries reached verdicts anyway, because that's what courts are built to do. In 2017, one jury alone awarded over $400 million to a single plaintiff. Verdicts like that are frequently appealed, revised, or overturned. A jury deciding a case is a legal outcome, not the same thing as a scientific consensus. The company has maintained consistently and to this day that its cosmetic talc does not contain asbestos and does not cause cancer. Facing tens of thousands of claims, the company repeatedly attempted to resolve the litigation by moving its talc liabilities into a separate subsidiary and placing that subsidiary into bankruptcy. Federal courts rejected the strategy 3 separate times, most recently in 2025, sending the company back into the ordinary court system, where it continues defending the claims directly. If you like stories where the real history gets more complicated than the headline, it's worth sticking around and subscribing. There's usually a new one within the week. By 2020, talc-based baby powder had quietly disappeared from store shelves in the United States and Canada, replaced by a cornstarch version the company had already been selling elsewhere. The company called it a business decision, citing falling demand. In 2022, it announced the talc version would be discontinued worldwide by 2023, while in the very same statement, insisting its position on the product's safety hadn't changed at all. Today, most of the baby powder sitting on store shelves isn't made from talc at all. In 2024, American regulators proposed a standardized method for testing cosmetic talc for asbestos, aimed directly at the detection problem that muddied the science for decades. In November of 2025, that proposal was withdrawn for further reconsideration. So right now, no single agreed testing standard is actually in force. The bottle looks almost exactly like it always did. What's inside it, and how confidently anyone can test what's inside it, changed because of 100 years of geology, a handful of internal memos nobody was supposed to see, and a body of science that, as of right now, still isn't finished being written.